Mafia boss laughed, offering his salary if someone could translate, but a shy waitress stunned everyone and left him speechless. The exclusive Italian restaurant Salvatore hummed with the quiet conversations of New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over white tablecloths and fine china, while waitstaff moved with practiced precision between tables. This wasn't just any restaurant, it was neutral territory in a city divided by invisible lines of power and influence. Lucy Rivers adjusted her red apron nervously, tucking a strand of light brown hair behind her ear. 6 months at Salvatore, and she still felt out of place among the wealthy patrons who could spend more on a bottle of wine than she made in 2 weeks. Tonight was particularly tense. The private section had been reserved for Alexander Moretti and his associates. Even Lucy, who actively avoided the local news, knew who Alexander Moretti was. The whispers followed him everywhere. Heir to the Moretti crime family, the man who controlled half of New York's underworld before his 30th birthday. Now at 34, his name alone made men cross the street to avoid his path. "Table 7 needs you," Sandra, the head waitress, whispered urgently. "And Lucy, be perfect. That's the Moretti table." Lucy's stomach tightened as she approached table 7. 5 men in expensive suits sat around it, drinking aged whiskey and speaking in lowered voices that ceased abruptly when she approached. But it was the man at the head of the table who commanded her attention without even trying. Alexander Moretti didn't need to raise his voice to dominate a room. With slicked-back dark hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, he exuded an aura of absolute control. The top buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, revealing a subtle gold chain against tanned skin. A heavy gold watch glinted on his wrist beside what looked like the edge of a tattoo, disappearing beneath his sleeve. "Another round," one of the men ordered without looking at her. Lucy nodded professionally, turning to leave when a conversation from the next table caught her attention. A businessman entertaining international clients. "I apologize," the businessman was saying. "I hired a translator, but they canceled last minute." One of his guests responded in rapid Italian, clearly frustrated. The businessman looked increasingly uncomfortable, his career potentially hanging in the balance of a conversation he couldn't understand. Before Lucy could stop herself, she stepped toward their table. "Posso aiutare?" she offered in flawless Italian. The foreign businessmen looked up in surprise, then relief washed over their faces. One responded eagerly, explaining their situation. Lucy nodded. "He says they need to finalize the contract terms tonight, or they'll have to take their business elsewhere," she translated for the American businessman. "You speak Italian?" the businessman asked, astonished. "My grandmother was from Florence. I grew up speaking it at home," Lucy explained with a humble shrug. What she hadn't noticed was that conversation at the Moretti table had stopped. All eyes, including Alexander Moretti's, were now fixed on her. $50,000 to anyone here who can translate what I'm about to say," Moretti suddenly announced to the restaurant, his voice carrying a subtle challenge. His men exchanged confused glances. This wasn't typical behavior for their boss. A heavy silence fell over the restaurant. Several patrons who clearly understood the offer shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Moretti's reputation ensured that even for such a sum, people preferred not to engage with him directly. Lucy hesitated, then turned slowly toward Moretti's table. Her rational mind screamed at her to walk away, to remain invisible as she'd always tried to be. But $50,000 would cover her mother's medical bills that had been piling up since her diagnosis. "I'll translate," she said, her voice softer than intended. The corner of Moretti's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly as he locked eyes with her. "Cosa vedi quando guardi un uomo come me? Vedi il mostro che tutti temono, o l'uomo che nessuno conosce?" he asked in perfect Italian, his voice dropping to a timbre that seemed meant only for her ears. Lucy's breath caught. The question was unexpectedly personal. "He asked what I see when I look at a man like him," Lucy translated carefully. "If I see the monster everyone fears or the man no one knows." A flash of something, surprise perhaps, crossed Moretti's features before his expression settled back into careful neutrality. The men around him exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with this unusual behavior from their boss. "And what's your answer?" Moretti asked, switching effortlessly to English. The question hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken implications. Lucy should have been intimidated. Anyone else would have been. But for reasons she couldn't explain, she met his gaze steadily. "I don't see either yet," she replied truthfully. "I don't know you well enough to see the man, and I make a point not to believe rumors about monsters." A beat of silence followed her words. Then Alexander Moretti did something that caused his men to stiffen in shock. He laughed. Not a performative chuckle or a menacing sound, but a genuine laugh that momentarily transformed his face. "Bring us another round," he said, dismissing her with a nod, "and the $50,000 is yours. I'll have it delivered tomorrow." Lucy returned to her duties, feeling his eyes follow her throughout the evening. She told herself the shiver running down her spine was from the air conditioning, not the intensity of his gaze. By closing time, the Moretti party had left. Lucy was wiping down tables when Sandra approached, her face pale. "What did you say to Alexander Moretti?" she whispered urgently. "Nothing important. Why?" Sandra handed her a business card, thick black cardstock with only a phone number embossed in gold. "He left this for you," Sandra explained. "Lucy, do you have any idea who he is? What he does? Men like Alexander Moretti don't notice women like us unless they want something." Lucy turned the card over in her hands. "He's just another rich customer." Sandra gripped her arm. "He's not just rich. He's dangerous. The kind of dangerous that makes people disappear. The Moretti family doesn't run businesses. They run an empire built on things we pretend not to see. Don't call that number." Lucy slipped the card into her pocket, nodding reassuringly at Sandra. But as she left the restaurant that night, the weight of the card seemed to burn against her thigh. $50,000 would solve so many problems, but at what cost? 2 days later, Lucy opened her apartment door to find a sleek black envelope on her doormat. Inside was a check for exactly $50,000 and a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. "A debt honored is a reputation maintained. The translation was worth every penny." M. Lucy stared at the check, her hands trembling slightly. How had he found her address? The implication sent a chill through her that was equal parts fear and something else she couldn't, or wouldn't, name. What she didn't know then, as she stood holding a check that could change her life, was that Alexander Moretti never did anything without purpose, and that his appearance at Salvatore that night was about to entangle their lives in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Because while Lucy had been focused on translating his words, Alexander had been focused on the impossibility of her existence. A woman who looked him in the eye without fear, who spoke the language of his ancestors with the ease of a native, and who had no idea that her presence had just disrupted years of carefully laid plans. Lucy hadn't expected to see Alexander Moretti again. Their arrangement had been fulfilled, the translation completed, the payment made. She'd tucked the business card into her dresser drawer, a reminder of a strange chapter she assumed was now closed. Then came the flowers, a stunning arrangement of white lilies delivered to Salvatore during her shift, with a simple card. "Thank you for your assistance." Just how well do you know Alexander Moretti?" Sandra asked, eyeing the expensive arrangement with suspicion. "I don't," Lucy insisted. "I helped with a translation, that's all." "Lucy," Sandra lowered her voice, "people who get involved with the Moretti family don't just walk away when the job is done. Be careful." Lucy wanted to dismiss Sandra's concerns, but the nagging sense that she'd stepped into something larger than herself wouldn't subside. That night, she finally searched Alexander Moretti online. The results were a study in contrasts. On paper, Alexander was a legitimate businessman, CEO of Moretti Holdings with interests in real estate, import, export, and hospitality. His public image was carefully cultivated, Occasional appearances at charity events, quotes in business magazines, photographs of him looking imperious in bespoke suits. But behind the veneer of legitimacy were the whispered stories, disappearances of business rivals, territories controlled through intimidation rather than contracts, a family history stretching back to the original 5 families of New York. Lucy scrolled through article after article, piecing together the public narrative of the man she'd met, born to power, raised to command it. Alexander had taken control of the family business at 25 when his father retired to Sicily. Under his leadership, the Moretti Empire had expanded, becoming more sophisticated, more insulated from legal scrutiny. What none of the articles mentioned, what no public record could capture, was the intensity in his eyes when he looked at her, or the way his carefully controlled demeanor had cracked just slightly when she'd stood her ground. Lucy was so absorbed in her research that she almost missed the soft knock at her door. Checking the peephole, she found a familiar figure in the hallway, Vito, Alexander's driver. "Mr. Moretti requests your presence," he said when she opened the door, his tone making it clear this wasn't entirely optional. "It's nearly midnight," Lucy protested. "It's urgent," was Vito's only explanation. Every rational thought told Lucy to refuse, to close the door and call the police. But curiosity, and something else she wasn't ready to name, won out. 20 minutes later, she was seated in the back of the now familiar black car. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Mr. Moretti is at his penthouse," Vito answered. "He apologizes for the hour." The penthouse occupied the top floor of one of Manhattan's most exclusive residential towers. The private elevator opened directly into a vast living space with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering cityscape. The decor was masculine and minimalist, all clean lines, dark wood, and muted colors. Alexander stood by the windows, his back to her, silhouette outlined against the city lights. He discarded his suit jacket and tie. His white shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal powerful forearms marked with intricate tattoos, symbols she didn't recognize, intertwined with what looked like dates. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "Did I have a choice?" Lucy asked. Now he turned, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "There's always a choice, Lucy, even when it doesn't feel like it." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the intimacy of it caught her off guard. "Why am I here?" she asked, remaining near the elevator. "Because I needed to speak with you somewhere private," he replied, crossing to a sideboard where crystal decanters caught the low light. "Drink?" Lucy shook her head. "I'd prefer answers." Alexander poured himself 2 fingers of amber liquid. "The Rossi family," he began, studying his glass, "had connections to certain organizations in Florence, organizations that eventually became adversaries of my family." Lucy frowned. "I don't understand. Your grandmother, Sophia Rossi, correct?" An uneasy feeling settled in Lucy's stomach. "How do you know her name?" "The same way I know she left Florence in 1962 under complicated circumstances. The same way I know she changed her name when she arrived in America. The same way I know that your mother never told you the whole story." Lucy's hands clenched at her sides. "My grandmother was a seamstress who came to America for a better life. There's no story beyond that." Alexander took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "The Rossis weren't just any family in Florence. They controlled the north side of the city for 3 generations. Your grandmother was the last surviving member after a particularly bloody territory dispute." Lucy felt as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. "That's not possible. My grandmother was—" She trailed off, memories suddenly rearranging themselves into a new, disturbing pattern. Her grandmother's insistence on teaching her Italian, the mysterious calls that came in the middle of the night, the way she always kept her back to the wall in restaurants. "Your grandmother was the daughter of Antonio Rossi, one of the most feared men in Florence," Alexander continued, his voice matter of fact. When the rival families moved against the Rossis, they killed everyone except Sophia, who escaped with help from an ally. "Why are you telling me this?" Lucy whispered. Alexander set down his glass and moved closer, stopping when he saw her instinctively step back, because Don Ricci recognized your name and because the Rossi bloodline was thought to be extinct. Your existence complicates matters. Complicates what? Territorial agreements, legacy claims, old blood debts. He ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture from a man who seemed otherwise carved from stone. The old families have long memories, Lucy, and whether you like it or not, you're part of that history. Lucy shook her head, denial rising in her throat. "No, I'm just a waitress who happens to speak Italian. That's it." Alexander's eyes softened fractionally. "I wish it were that simple." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded photograph, offering it to her. Lucy took it reluctantly. The black and white image showed a group of men in suits standing on the steps of an ornate building. In the center was a man with a familiar smile, her grandmother's smile. "Antonio Rossi," Alexander confirmed, watching her face. "Your great-grandfather." Lucy stared at the photograph, unable to reconcile this revelation with everything she'd believed about her family. "What does this mean for me? Why should I care about old family feuds?" "Because Don Ricci isn't the only one who recognized your name, and not everyone who remembers the Rossis will be as civilized in their curiosity." A chill ran through Lucy. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" Alexander moved to the window again, looking out at the city he controlled. "I'm saying that knowledge is protection, and that you now have my attention." The implication hung in the air between them. His attention could be a shield or a sentence. "I don't want any part of this world," Lucy said firmly. "Unfortunately, it's not about what either of us wants." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "You need to understand what you're dealing with, Lucy. This isn't a game you can opt out of now that you've been recognized." "So what do? "You let me help you." Lucy gave a hollow laugh. "Why would you help me? Our families were enemies." "Were," Alexander emphasized. "The past is the past. I'm more concerned with the present and with ensuring that the delicate balance I've maintained in this city isn't disrupted by your sudden appearance." "I'm hardly disruptive," Lucy protested. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You disrupted an entire restaurant by simply existing. You disrupted my men who haven't seen me laugh in years. You disrupted me." The last words were spoken so quietly, she almost missed them. Before Lucy could respond, Alexander's phone chimed. He checked it, his expression hardening. "We have to go," he said, suddenly all business again. "There's a situation that requires my attention." "What kind of situation?" Lucy asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Alexander hesitated, seemingly weighing how much to tell her. "The kind that makes knowing who you are even more important right now." He crossed to a closet, retrieving his suit jacket and sliding it on with practiced ease. "Vito will take you home. Stay there. Don't answer your door or your phone unless it's me." "You're scaring me," Lucy admitted. Alexander paused, then approached her slowly, as one might approach a skittish animal. He reached out, his fingertips just barely brushing her cheek in a touch so light it might have been imagined. "Good," he said softly. "Fear keeps people alive in my world." Before she could react to the unexpected contact, he had stepped back, professional distance restored. "I'll contact you tomorrow," he said, guiding her toward the elevator. "In the meantime, think about what I've told you. Ask yourself why your grandmother never shared her past with your mother, why she insisted on teaching you Italian so perfectly." In the car, Lucy sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything she'd learned. The photograph of Antonio Rossi burned in her pocket like a brand, connecting her to a history she'd never known existed. Back at her apartment, she double-locked the doors and drew the curtains tight, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. Sleep eluded her as she tossed and turned, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. Morning brought no clarity, only the bone-deep certainty that her life had irrevocably changed. She called in sick to work, unable to face the mundane reality of Salvatore when her entire understanding of herself had been shattered. By noon, restlessness drove her to the one place she thought might hold answers. Her mother's house in Queens, where boxes of her grandmother's belongings still sat in the attic, untouched since her death 5 years ago. Her mother was at work, but Lucy still had a key. The house was quiet and familiar, a sanctuary untouched by the revelations of the previous night. In the attic, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight as Lucy pulled box after box from the eaves, searching for... she wasn't even sure what. In the third box, beneath layers of carefully preserved clothing, Lucy found a false bottom. Her heart racing, she pried it open to reveal a small leather-bound journal, a tarnished silver locket, and a yellowed envelope. The journal was written in a coded Italian that would take time to decipher. The locket contained a miniature photograph of a handsome young man in military uniform, but it was the contents of the envelope that made Lucy's blood run cold. Official documentation of a name change from Sophia Rossi to Sophie Ross, dated 1962. A newspaper clipping reporting the massacre of the Rossi family in Florence, with Sophia listed among the dead. Her grandmother had faked her own death to escape to America. Everything Alexander had told her was true. Lucy was so absorbed in her discovery that she didn't hear the front door open, didn't realize she wasn't alone until a shadow fell across the attic floor. "I told you to stay in your apartment," Alexander said from the doorway, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Lucy scrambled to her feet. "How did you find me?" "The same way I found your address. I have people watching you." Under different circumstances, she might have been outraged at this invasion of privacy. Now she could only stare at him. The evidence of her grandmother's deception spread around her like accusatory fingers. "You were telling the truth," she said softly. "I rarely lie," Alexander replied, his anger seeming to dissipate as he took in her stunned expression. "It's inefficient." He crossed to where she stood, kneeling beside her to examine the items she'd discovered. His fingers hovered over the journal without touching it, a strange reverence in his gesture. "This could be valuable," he murmured. The Rossis were known for their extensive network of informants. Their records were believed lost in the fire that destroyed their estate. Lucy looked at him sharply. "Is that why you're interested in me? For whatever information my grandmother might have left behind?" Alexander's eyes met hers, surprisingly earnest. "That's part of it," he admitted, "but not all. What's the rest?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You intrigue me, Lucy Rivers, or should I say Lucy Rossi. You've lived your entire life unaware of who you really are. Yet you carry yourself with the innate confidence of your bloodline." The compliment, if that's what it was, left Lucy unsure how to respond. "I'm still the same person I was yesterday," she insisted. Alexander shook his head. "Knowledge changes us. You can't unlearn your history." "I can choose not to be defined by it." A smile tugged at his lips. "That's exactly what I'd expect a Rossi to say." Before Lucy could retort, Alexander's phone rang. His expression darkened as he answered it, listening briefly before issuing a curt order and hanging up. "We need to leave," he said, all traces of warmth vanishing from his voice. "Now." "What's wrong?" Someone else has connected the dots, someone who remembers the Rossis less fondly than Don Ricci. Fear clenched in Lucy's stomach. "Who?" "The Bianchi family. They're the ones who orchestrated the hit on your family in the 60s, and now their heir, Marco Bianchi, has returned to New York after hearing rumors of a surviving Rossi." Lucy gathered the journal, locket, and documentation, stuffing them into her bag. "What does he want with me?" "To finish what his grandfather started," Alexander said grimly, "or to use you as leverage in negotiations with me. Either way, you're not safe here." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Lucy insisted, even as she continued gathering her grandmother's belongings. "I need to warn my mother. If these people are as dangerous as you say—" "Your mother is already being watched by my men," Alexander cut in, his tone brooking no argument. "The safest thing you can do for her is to come with me now. The Bianc will target you first to draw her out." Lucy hesitated, torn between her instinct to run and the undeniable logic of his words. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked. "For all I know, the Morettis could have been enemies of the Rossis, too." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. "Respect, perhaps. We were business associates, not enemies. Your great-grandfather and mine maintained a mutually beneficial arrangement for decades." He extended his hand to her, a gesture both commanding and oddly gentle. "You can read your grandmother's journal once we're somewhere secure. For now, we need to leave." Against her better judgment, Lucy placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and surprisingly gentle despite their strength. The simple contact sent an unexpected current through her body, a sharp reminder that beneath the fear and confusion, there was something else brewing between them, something just as dangerous in its own way. Alexander led her quickly down the stairs and through the house. A black SUV with tinted windows idled at the curb, Vito at the wheel, and another man in the passenger seat, his broad shoulders and watchful eyes marking him as security. "This is Enzo," Alexander introduced as they settled in the back seat. "He'll be part of your security detail until this situation is resolved." "Security detail?" Lucy echoed. "How long do you expect the situation to last?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Until Marco Bianchi is no longer a threat." The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. Lucy turned to stare out the window as the SUV pulled away from her mother's neighborhood, trying to reconcile the mundane streets of Queens with the shadowy world she'd been thrust into. "Where are we going?" she asked after several minutes of silence. "One of my properties, upstate. It's secure, remote, and not connected to me in any public records." The city gradually gave way to suburbs, then to the lush greenery of upstate New York. Lucy watched the transformation through the window, feeling increasingly untethered from her normal life with each passing mile. 2 hours later, they turned onto a private road that wound through dense forest before opening onto a clearing where a modern glass and stone structure rose organically from the landscape. Unlike the ostentatious mansions of the nouveau riche, this house was understated in its luxury, designed to blend with its natural surroundings while offering uncompromising security. High-tech surveillance cameras were disguised within the architectural elements. The grounds provided no cover for approach. "It's beautiful," Lucy murmured despite herself as they pulled into a covered garage. "My mother designed it," Alexander replied, a hint of unexpected softness in his voice. "She believed that power didn't need to announce itself to be effective." Inside, the house was a study in restrained elegance, clean lines, natural materials, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the forest like living art. A housekeeper appeared silently to take Lucy's bag, while Enzo and Vito conducted a security sweep with practiced efficiency. "You'll stay in the East Wing," Alexander informed her, leading the way through the main living area. "My mother's old suite. It has its own terrace and study. I thought you might want to examine your grandmother's journal there." The suite was lovely, airy and feminine in a way Lucy wouldn't have expected from a Moretti property. The sitting room opened onto a private terrace overlooking a small lake, while the bedroom featured a canopied bed, an antique vanity that must have belonged to Alexander's mother. "There are clothes in the closet," Alexander said, lingering at the door. "My assistant guessed your size. If anything doesn't fit, let Maria know." Lucy set her grandmother's journal on a side table, suddenly overwhelmed by the unreality of her situation. "Alexander," she began, using his first name without thinking. "What happens now?" His expression softened marginally at her use of his name. "Now you stay here where it's safe, while I deal with Marco Bianchi. Your mother believes you've taken a leave of absence for a health retreat, courtesy of a generous regular at Salvatore. Your job will be held for you. As for your life," he paused. "That depends on what we learn from your grandmother's journal and how quickly I can resolve the Bianchi situation." Lucy sank onto the edge of the bed, the magnitude of the changes in her life finally hitting her full force. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Few of us ask for the lives we're born into," Alexander replied, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "We simply make the best of the hand we're dealt." When Lucy looked up, there was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, understanding, perhaps even empathy. For a brief moment, she glimpsed the man beneath the power, the human behind the feared name. "I'll leave you to rest," he said, retreating to the doorway. "Dinner is at 7 if you feel up to joining me. Otherwise, Maria will bring a tray." After he left, Lucy explored the suite, finding the closet filled with clothing in exactly her size, simple, elegant pieces that suited her taste perfectly. The bathroom was stocked with high-end toiletries, and a laptop sat on the desk in the study, its sleek design suggesting it was new and purchased specifically for her use. The level of preparation was both thoughtful and unsettling. How long had Alexander been planning to bring her here? How much had he known about her before that night at Salvatore? With these questions swirling in her mind, Lucy turned to her grandmother's journal. The code was complex, but followed patterns Lucy recognized from the secret language they'd shared when she was a child. Slowly, she began to decipher the entries, losing herself in her grandmother's hidden past. Hours passed as Lucy pieced together the truth of Sophia Rossi's life. Her position as the daughter of a powerful family, her forbidden romance with a young man from a neutral faction, the betrayal that led to her family's destruction, and her harrowing escape to America with the help of an unnamed ally from the Moretti family. The final entry, dated a week before Sophia's official death, contained a warning. "If you are reading this, it means our enemies have found you. Trust no one except those who bear the mark of the falcon. The Moretti falcon is bound by blood oath to protect the last of the Rossi line. This is a debt that transcends generations." Lucy stared at the words, then at the ornate falcon insignia embossed subtly on the leather cover, the same falcon she'd glimpsed tattooed on Alexander's forearm. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Maria stood there, a concerned expression on her lined face. "Miss, it's past 8. Mr. Moretti asked me to check if you would like dinner brought up." Lucy realized she'd completely lost track of time. "I'm sorry. I was absorbed in reading. I'll come down." She found Alexander in the dining room, jacket discarded and sleeves rolled up, working on a laptop while a meal waited untouched. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral despite the flash of something like relief in his eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd join me," he said, closing the laptop. Lucy took the seat across from him, noting how the table had been set for an intimate dinner, despite its capacity to seat 12. "I found something in my grandmother's journal that I think you should explain." Alexander raised an eyebrow in silent question. "She wrote about a blood oath between the Rossis and the Morettis, a falcon mark." Lucy gestured to his forearm where she knew the tattoo lurked beneath his sleeve. "Like the one you have." For a long moment, Alexander was silent, seeming to weigh his response. Then he slowly rolled up his left sleeve to reveal the tattoo in its entirety, an intricately detailed falcon with wings spread in protection over what Lucy now recognized as the Rossi family crest. "The oath was taken by my grandfather," he explained quietly. "Your great-grandfather saved his life during a conflict with a common enemy. In return, he swore that the Morettis would always protect the Rossi bloodline if called upon. And now I'm upholding that oath." He rotated his arm to show a date tattooed beneath the falcon, the day they'd met at Salvatore. "When I realized who you were, I added this, a reminder of when my obligation began." Lucy stared at the tattoo, a strange emotion constricting her throat. So, all of this, bringing me here, protecting me, it's just about honoring some decades-old promise? Alexander's eyes darkened. Initially, yes, and now... He held her gaze, something dangerous and unspoken passing between them. Now, it's more complicated. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with tension that had nothing to do with family histories or blood oaths. Lucy was acutely aware of his physical presence across the table, the controlled power in his shoulders, the intensity in his eyes, the way his mouth softened almost imperceptibly when he looked at her. "You hardly know me," she said softly. "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're brave enough to look me in the eye when men twice your size can't. I know you're loyal enough to worry about your mother's safety before your own. I know you're intelligent enough to decipher a code that has stumped experts for decades." He reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of touching hers. "And I know that when I'm with you, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time." "What's that?" Lucy asked, her voice barely audible. "Possibility," Alexander answered simply. The word hung between them, fraught with implications. Lucy felt herself drawn toward him despite every rational thought warning her away. This man was dangerous, not just because of his position or power, but because of how he made her feel. Like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, one step away from a fall that would change everything. Before either could act on the tension building between them, Alexander's phone vibrated on the table. His expression hardened as he checked the message. "Marco Bianchi has made contact," he said, all softness vanishing from his voice. "He's requesting a meeting." "What does that mean?" Lucy asked, the moment broken. "It means he's willing to negotiate." Alexander's eyes met hers, cold and calculating once more. "He's offering terms." "What kind of terms?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "A marriage alliance. Between you and his son." Lucy's stomach dropped. "That's medieval." "It's business," Alexander corrected, though the disgust in his tone belied his words. "Old families still operate by old rules. Marco is trying to legitimize his claim to former Rossi territories by binding your bloodline to his. And if I refuse, then negotiations fail, and we move to less civilized methods of conflict resolution." Lucy pushed away from the table, suddenly unable to sit still. "This is insane. I can't be bartered away like some medieval princess." Alexander rose as well, his height and presence filling the space between them. "No one is bartering you away, Lucy. I won't accept his terms." "Why not? Isn't that the simplest solution to your problem?" Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Because you're under my protection." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Because the oath I honor gives me the right to refuse any claim on your behalf." "And what if I decided to accept?" Lucy challenged, tilting her chin up defiantly. "To end the situation?" In one fluid movement, Alexander closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cradle her face with surprising gentleness. "You won't," he said with absolute certainty. "You don't know what I'll do," Lucy whispered, even as she found herself leaning into his touch. "I know that the same fire that helped your grandmother escape death runs in your veins," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You won't surrender to threats. It's not in your nature." Their faces were inches apart now, his eyes dark with an emotion Lucy was afraid to name. She should step away, maintain the distance that sanity demanded. Instead, she found herself swaying closer, drawn by a pull that defied logic. "Alexander," she breathed, unsure if it was a question or a warning. He answered by closing the final distance between them, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly blazed into something fierce and consuming. His arms enveloped her, strong and secure, as her hands found their way to his shoulders, then his hair, fingers tangling in the dark strands. The kiss deepened, years of Alexander's carefully maintained control crumbling as Lucy responded with equal fervor. This was madness. She hardly knew him. He was dangerous in ways she was only beginning to understand, but in this moment, none of that mattered. There was only the heat of his body against hers, the taste of him, the surprising tenderness in the way he held her as if she were something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Lucy saw a raw vulnerability in Alexander's eyes, an expression she suspected few had ever witnessed. "This complicates things," he said, his voice rough. Lucy gave a small, breathless laugh. "I think things were already complicated." Alexander brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "I won't let anything happen to you, Lucy. Not because of an oath, not because of your bloodline, but because—" He stopped, seeming unable to find the words for whatever was growing between them. "Because," Lucy prompted softly. Before Alexander could answer, a security alarm blared through the house. His expression transformed instantly, all tenderness replaced by cold calculation. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the door, his hand reaching inside his jacket to extract a gun she hadn't known he was carrying. "What's happening?" Lucy asked, fear cutting through the lingering warmth of their embrace. Alexander's eyes met hers one last time, his gaze intense. "It seems Marco Bianchi wasn't as interested in negotiating as I thought." The last thing Lucy saw before security personnel ushered her to a panic room was Alexander striding purposefully toward danger, his posture that of a man fully in his element, the dangerous, powerful figure the world feared, not the man who had just held her with such unexpected gentleness. And in that moment, Lucy finally understood the dual nature that had confounded her from the beginning. Both versions were real. The ruthless leader and the man capable of tenderness, the monster everyone feared and the man no one knew. The question now was which one would return to her when the night was over. Time lost meaning in the windowless panic room. Lucy paced the small space, her mind racing between fear for Alexander's safety and frustration at being locked away from the action. The security monitors showed only empty hallways and rooms. The cameras in the areas where conflict might be occurring had been disabled or were being deliberately kept offline to protect her from witnessing anything too disturbing. Hours passed before the heavy security door finally hissed open. Lucy's heart leapt to her throat, relief washing over her as Alexander stepped inside. His appearance, however, stopped her cold. His pristine white shirt was now spotted with blood, a bruise darkening along his jaw, and his eyes held a coldness she hadn't seen before. "Are you hurt?" she asked, crossing to him without thinking. "It's not my blood," he replied flatly, though he didn't stop her when her fingers gently traced the bruise on his face. "What happened?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Marco Bianchi sent men to extract you. They failed." The clinical way he delivered this information sent a chill down Lucy's spine. This was the Alexander Moretti the world feared, the man who dealt with threats permanently and without remorse. "Did you—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "They've been handled," he said simply, "but this was just the first move. Bianchi will try again, with more men and better intelligence." Lucy sank onto the edge of a chair, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. "People could have died tonight because of me." Alexander knelt before her, taking her hands in his. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the violence evident in his appearance. "No," he said firmly. "People could have died tonight because Marco Bianchi is a power-hungry opportunist who sees you as a pawn. None of this is your fault, Lucy." She looked into his eyes, searching for the man who had kissed her hours earlier. He was still there beneath the cold exterior of the crime lord, the duality of him both terrifying and compelling. "We need to move you," Alexander continued, rising to his feet. "This location has been compromised." "Where?" My main residence in the city. It's more heavily fortified, and I need to be there to coordinate our response to Bianca." Lucy nodded, too exhausted to argue. The night's events had drained her, leaving only a numb acceptance in their wake. The journey back to the city passed in tense silence. Alexander worked on his phone, issuing instructions in terse Italian that Lucy was too tired to fully translate. Twice he reached across the seat as if to touch her, only to pull back at the last moment. The barrier between them palpable, after what they'd shared and what had followed. Alexander's city residence proved to be a fortress disguised as a luxury penthouse. The entire top 3 floors of a building he owned had been converted into a secure compound with state-of-the-art security, bullet-resistant glass, and a staff that moved with military precision. "You'll stay in the guest suite," Alexander informed her as a stone-faced housekeeper showed her to a beautifully appointed room. "Try to rest. We'll talk in the morning." But rest proved elusive. Every time Lucy closed her eyes, she saw Alexander's blood-spattered shirt, the cold emptiness in his gaze as he'd said, "They've been handled." She'd known intellectually what kind of man he was, what his position demanded, but seeing the aftermath of violence had made it viscerally real in a way she couldn't ignore. Dawn found her sitting on the windowsill, watching the city wake beneath her. New York looked different from this height. Smaller somehow, its streets forming the veins and arteries of an organism Alexander controlled from this lofty perch. A soft knock drew her attention. Alexander stood in the doorway, freshly showered and immaculately dressed. No trace of the previous night's violence except for the bruise along his jaw. "You didn't sleep," he observed. "Neither did you," Lucy countered, noting the shadows beneath his eyes. He acknowledged this with a slight nod, entering the room but maintaining a careful distance. "We need to discuss our next steps." "Our?" Lucy questioned. "I'm still trying to understand how this became my fight." Alexander's expression softened fractionally. "It became your fight the moment Marco Bianchi learned of your existence. Whether you want it or not, you're a Rossi, and that name still carries weight in certain circles." "So what do we do?" "I've called a meeting of the 5 families," Alexander said, his tone matter-of-fact despite the weightiness of his words. "The first full council in over a decade. Marco Bianchi has violated our territorial agreements and peace accords. He'll be held accountable." Lucy stared at him. "Like in The Godfather? That's a real thing?" A ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips. "Hollywood gets some things right. The council operates as a governing body for disputes between families. Bianchi's actions warrant intervention. And what about me? Am I supposed to attend this council meeting?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "Your presence would only inflame the situation. But your name will be acknowledged, your lineage confirmed. The Rossi family will be formally recognized as under Moretti protection." Lucy rose from the windowsill, frustration bubbling up. "So I just sit here locked away while my fate is decided by a room full of men I've never met?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "This is how our world works, Lucy. It's not my world," she shot back. "It is now," he replied, his voice gentler than his words. "Whether by choice or circumstance, you're part of this life now. The sooner you accept that, the better equipped you'll be to survive it." Lucy turned away, staring out at the city again. "And if I don't want to just survive? If I want to live?" She felt, rather than saw, Alexander move closer, the heat of his body suddenly at her back, though he didn't touch her. "Then you adapt," he said quietly. "You learn the rules, then figure out how to bend them without breaking them. That's what your grandmother did." Lucy turned to face him, finding herself mere inches from his chest. "Is that what you do? Bend without breaking?" Alexander's eyes darkened. "I do what's necessary to protect what's mine." The possessive word hung between them, its implications clear. Lucy should have been offended, should have rejected the notion that she belonged to anyone. Instead, she felt a traitorous warmth spreading through her. "I'm not yours," she said, the words lacking conviction even to her own ears. Alexander reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and traced the line of her cheek with his fingertips. "Aren't you?" he murmured. "The moment you walked into my protection, the moment you accepted my help, perhaps even the moment you first looked me in the eye without fear, something changed between us." Lucy wanted to deny it, but the same electric current that had sparked between them the night before hummed beneath her skin at his touch. "This is insane," she whispered. "I barely know you." "And yet you know me better than most," he countered. "You see both sides of me, the man and the monster, and you're still here, still looking me in the eye." His hand slid to cup the nape of her neck, gentle despite the strength she knew it contained. Lucy found herself leaning into his touch, her body betraying her mind's misgivings. "The council meets tonight," Alexander said, his voice rough. "Until then, I need to know you'll stay here where it's safe." "And after the council, what then?" His eyes held hers, sincere despite their intensity. "Then we figure out what this is between us, without the immediate threat of Bianca hanging over our heads." It was the closest thing to a declaration she was likely to get from a man like Alexander Moretti, a promise of possibility, a future worth considering. Lucy nodded slowly. "I'll stay. But I want updates, Alexander, real ones. Don't shelter me from the truth of what's happening." A smile touched his lips, a genuine one that transformed his face. Anyone else would be begging for ignorance. "I'm not anyone else," Lucy replied simply. "No," he agreed, his thumb tracing her lower lip in a touch so gentle it barely registered. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken desires and complications. Then Alexander stepped back, his expression shifting back to business. "Maria will bring you breakfast," he said. "I have preparations to make for tonight. Try to rest if you can." After he left, Lucy pressed her fingertips to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his touch. She was falling for a man whose world operated by rules she barely understood, whose power was built on fear and violence, whose enemies wouldn't hesitate to use her against him. It was madness. And yet, when he looked at her with those dark eyes that saw all of her, not just the waitress, not just the Rossi heir, but Lucy herself, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. The day passed slowly, with Lucy alternating between pacing restlessly and poring over her grandmother's journal, piecing together more of the history that had led to this moment. The entries painted a picture of the Rossi family's fall, betrayed from within by someone close to them, someone who had sold information to the Bianca about security protocols and escape routes. By evening, Lucy had developed a theory that made her blood run cold. The betrayal hadn't come from just anyone. The journal hinted that it had been Sophia's own fiancé, a man from a neutral family who had been secretly aligned with the Bianchi all along, a man whose surname was eerily similar to Marco Bianchi's mother's maiden name. Lucy was about to search for Alexander to share her discovery when Maria appeared at her door. Her normally impassive face was tight with concern. "Mr. Moretti asked me to inform you that the council meeting has been moved up. He's already left." Alarm coursed through Lucy. "Where is the meeting being held?" Maria hesitated, clearly uncomfortable sharing information she considered above Lucy's clearance level. "Please," Lucy pressed. "It's important." "The old Dapoli restaurant in Little Italy." Maria finally relented. "It's neutral territory." Lucy's mind raced, connecting the dots from her grandmother's journal. If her suspicions were correct, the sudden change in venue wasn't a coincidence. It was a setup, just as the Rossi family had been set up decades ago. "I need to warn Alexander," she said, already reaching for her phone. Maria shook her head. "Security protocols. No phones during council meetings." "Then I need to go there." The housekeeper's eyes widened. "Mr. Moretti gave explicit instructions that you are not to leave the penthouse under any circumstances." Lucy met the woman's gaze steadily. "And if I told you his life might depend on me breaking those instructions?" Something shifted in Maria's expression. recognition, perhaps, of the same determination she'd seen in other strong women who had navigated this world. "The service elevator," Maria said quietly. "Enzo is stationed at the main entrance, but Carlo at the service entrance is new. Less vigilant." Lucy grabbed her grandmother's journal and the locket containing the photograph. "Thank you." 20 minutes and one convincing story to Carlo later, Lucy was in a taxi heading for Little Italy. The streets were congested, each red light and traffic jam increasing her anxiety. What if she was wrong? What if she was simply paranoid, seeing conspiracies where none existed? But her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Trust the pattern. When history repeats itself, it rarely disguises its methods. The old Dapoli restaurant had been closed to the public for the evening, its windows dark except for a faint glow from the back room. Lucy paid the taxi driver and approached cautiously, uncertainty gripping her. She had no plan, no way of entering a meeting guarded by the security details of 5 crime families. As she hesitated in the shadows across the street, a sleek black car pulled up to the restaurant. A familiar figure emerged, Marco Bianchi, based on the photographs she'd seen in her research. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps only a few years older than Alexander, with the same air of lethal elegance. But it was the man who followed him from the car that made Lucy's blood freeze. Elderly, but still imposing. He matched the faded photograph in her grandmother's locket, the man who had been engaged to Sofia Rossi before betraying her family to the Bianchi. This wasn't just a meeting, it was an ambush with decades of planning behind it. Lucy was considering her limited options when a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, stifling her startled cry. "Don't scream," a woman's voice whispered in her ear. "I'm here to help." The hand slowly released her. Lucy turned to find herself face to face with an elegant woman in her 50s. Her silver-streaked dark hair and sharp features were vaguely familiar. "Who are you?" Lucy demanded, backing away slightly. "Francesca Moretti," the woman replied, "Alexander's mother, and you are the Rossi girl who has turned my son's carefully ordered world upside down." Lucy stared at her in shock. "Alexander said you were in Sicily." A smile curved Francesca's lips. "My son prefers to know where everyone is at all times. I prefer to maintain some independence." Her expression turned serious. "Now tell me why you're here instead of safely locked away in my son's fortress." Quickly, Lucy explained her discovery about the betrayal and her fears about the council meeting. Francesca's face hardened. "History does indeed repeat itself. Come with me." She led Lucy around the block to an unassuming door that appeared to lead to an apartment above a bakery. Inside, however, was a narrow passage that connected to the restaurant's upper floor. "The original owner was my father's cousin," Francesca explained as they moved silently through the passage. "The families think they know all the secrets of this place, but some were kept within bloodlines." They emerged into what had once been an office, now dusty with disuse. Through a vent in the floor, they could hear voices from the meeting room below. "Insult to all of us," Marco Bianchi was saying, his voice smooth as silk yet edged with venom. "The Moretti family, harboring a Rossi without council approval, violates the territorial agreements of 1964. The Rossi line was declared extinct," Alexander's voice replied, controlled but with an undercurrent of tension Lucy had come to recognize. "The re-emergence of an heir falls under legacy protection clauses, not territorial dispute resolution." A convenient interpretation. An older voice Lucy didn't recognize commented, "but one that benefits only the Morettis." "The girl should be presented to the council," another voice insisted. "Let us determine her legitimacy and appropriate status." "The girl," Alexander said with dangerous softness, "is under my personal protection. Her legitimacy has been verified through documentation and blood oath records." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room at the mention of blood oaths, sacred bonds rarely invoked in modern times. "Perhaps," the elderly man Lucy had seen with Marco suggested, his voice carrying the weight of authority, This situation calls for a traditional resolution, a union between families to restore balance. Francesca's lips thinned. Vincenzo Falcone, she whispered to Lucy, Marco's maternal grandfather and the architect of the Rossi massacre. He wants to finish what he started 60 years ago. Below, Alexander's chair scraped back. There will be no union. The Rossi heir remains under Moretti protection, as sworn by my grandfather to Antonio Rossi. Any move against her will be considered an act of war against my family. The tension in the room was palpable, even from their hidden vantage point. Bold words, Marco observed silkily, but I wonder if the council will support such an aggressive stance when they learn the full truth about your personal interest in the Rossi girl. Lucy felt heat rise to her cheeks as murmurs filled the room. Even in this world of power and ancient codes, gossip traveled quickly. My personal affairs are irrelevant to council matters, Alexander stated coldly. They become relevant, Vincenzo interjected, when they cloud judgment and threaten the balance we've maintained for generations. What happened next unfolded with startling speed. The door to the meeting room burst open, and armed men flooded in. Not Moretti or Bianch's soldiers, but a third faction Lucy couldn't identify. Federal agents, everyone on the ground now. In the chaos that followed, Lucy couldn't distinguish individual voices or actions. Francesca grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the vent. We need to leave, she hissed. Now. Alexander, my son can handle himself, Francesca assured her. But if you're captured, all of this becomes much more complicated. They retreated through the passage, emerging onto a side street just as sirens began to wail in the distance. Francesca led Lucy through a maze of alleys and side streets, eventually bringing them to a small, unassuming apartment building. My private residence, she explained as she unlocked the door to a stylish but modest apartment. Few people know of its existence, including Alexander. Lucy sank onto a couch, the night's events catching up with her. The raid wasn't a coincidence, was it? Francesca shook her head, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid and handing one to Lucy. Marco Bianchi has been under federal investigation for months. Someone tipped off the authorities about the council meeting. A grim smile touched her lips. And I have a strong suspicion who that someone might have been. Lucy took a sip of the drink, wincing at the burn. Alexander? My son plays a long game, Francesca confirmed. Marco made his first mistake when he sent men to the lake house. His second was believing Alexander would come to the council meeting unprepared. Us? But Alexander was taken in the raid too, Lucy pointed out. Francesca's smile widened slightly. Appearances can be deceiving. The authorities have nothing on my son that will stick. His businesses are carefully insulated. But Marco, his operations are less discriminating. Lucy was struggling to process this new layer of complexity when Francesca's phone chimed with a message. The older woman checked it, her expression softening with relief. Alexander is fine, she reported, released after questioning. He's furious that you left the penthouse, by the way. Despite everything, Lucy felt a smile tug at her lips. I imagine he is. Francesca studied her thoughtfully. You care for my son? It wasn't a question, and Lucy didn't treat it as one. It's complicated. Love in our world always is, Francesca replied with surprising gentleness, but sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us human. Before Lucy could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Francesca checked the security monitor, then unlocked it to reveal Alexander, his expression thunderous. Mother, he acknowledged tightly before his eyes found Lucy. The relief that flashed across his face was quickly replaced by anger. You were supposed to stay at the penthouse. If I had, Lucy replied calmly, you wouldn't know that Vincenzo Falcone was the man who betrayed my grandmother's family 60 years ago, the same man who was setting you up tonight. Alexander's gaze flickered to his mother, who nodded in confirmation. She figured it out from her grandmother's journal, Francesca explained. Smart girl. Reminds me of Sophia. She never missed a pattern either. Some of the tension left Alexander's shoulders as he moved into the apartment, his eyes never leaving Lucy. Marco Bianchi has been arrested on multiple federal charges, he informed them, accepting the drink his mother offered. His organization will be in chaos for months, possibly years. Vincenzo managed to avoid arrest, but his influence with the council is severely diminished after tonight's disaster. "You're doing?" Lucy guessed. A hint of satisfaction gleamed in Alexander's eyes. Let's just say certain evidence found its way to the right federal agents at an opportune moment. "And the other families?" Francesca inquired. "Temporarily disorganized but ultimately unharmed," Alexander replied. "They'll be cautious for a while, focused on their legitimate businesses. The balance of power has shifted in our favor." Lucy absorbed this information, understanding its significance. Alexander hadn't just neutralized a threat. He'd consolidated power, strengthened his position, all while maintaining the appearance of being as vulnerable as his rivals. "You risked a lot," she observed quietly. Alexander's eyes met hers. "Some things are worth the risk." The weight of his gaze made it clear he wasn't just talking about business strategy. Francesca cleared her throat delicately. "I believe I'll retire for the evening. Alexander, the guest room is prepared if you and Lucy wish to stay." 6 months later, Lucy stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander's penthouse, their penthouse now, watching snow dust the Manhattan skyline with gentle persistence. Behind her, the sounds of final preparations for the evening's gathering created a pleasant backdrop of normality that still sometimes felt surreal. So much had changed since that night at Francesca's apartment. Marco Bianchi remained in federal custody, his organization dismantled piece by piece through strategic information leaks and cooperation from rivals eager to claim portions of his territory. Vincenzo Falcone had retreated to Sicily, his influence among the families diminished to nearly nothing after Alexander had revealed his role in betraying the Rossis, a violation of the old codes that even the most hardened family leaders couldn't overlook. And Lucy, she had changed, perhaps most of all. "Penny, for your thoughts," Alexander's voice came from behind her, followed by the warmth of his arms encircling her waist. Lucy leaned back against him, savoring the solid strength of his chest, just reflecting on how different everything is now. He pressed a kiss to the side of her neck. "Regrets?" "Not one," she replied honestly, turning in his arms to face him. The Alexander who looked back at her was still the powerful, dangerous man she'd first met at Salvatore, but there was a lightness to him now that few, besides Lucy, ever witnessed. In private moments like this, the weight of his position seemed to lift slightly, allowing glimpses of the man beneath the carefully cultivated exterior. "The first guests will arrive soon," he reminded her, though he made no move to release her. Lucy straightened his tie, a gesture that had become comfortingly familiar. "Your mother already called twice to make sure everything is perfect." A smile touched Alexander's lips. "She's determined to make this the social event of the season. It's not every day the Moretti family officially introduces a long-lost Rossi heir to society and announces an engagement in the process." Alexander's hand found hers, his thumb brushing over the antique ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Are you ready for this? Once we make the announcement public, there's no going back to anonymity." Lucy considered his question seriously. The past months had been a gradual integration into Alexander's world, learning its rules, understanding its power structures, finding her place within its hierarchy. She'd expected to feel like an imposter, but instead found that certain aspects of this life came to her with surprising naturalness, as if some hereditary memory of being a Rossi had been dormant within her all along. "I'm ready," she assured him, "though I still think some of the old traditions are ridiculous." Alexander laughed, the sound still rare enough to delight her. "Says the woman who insisted we honor the blood oath with proper ceremony when we announced our engagement to the family council." "That was different," Lucy protested with a smile. That was about respecting history while making it clear I wasn't being claimed as some medieval property transfer. The ceremony she'd designed had acknowledged the ancient blood oath between their families while establishing that their union was one of equals, not the fulfillment of an obligation, but a choice made freely by both parties. It had shocked the old guard, but earned her their respect. "You've changed how things are done," Alexander observed, pride evident in his voice. Not many could have navigated this world so effectively in such a short time. "I had good teachers," Lucy acknowledged, thinking of Francesca's patient guidance and Alexander's careful explanations of the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined their world. The ring of the elevator announced the arrival of the first guests. Lucy took a steadying breath as Alexander offered his arm. "Shall we, Miss Rivers? Or should I say the last daughter of the Rossi family?" Lucy took his arm with a smile. "Soon to be Mrs. Moretti." Actually, the gathering was small by Moretti standards, only 50 of their closest allies and family members, each carefully vetted and searched before being allowed entry. Lucy greeted guests with growing confidence, no longer the uncertain waitress thrust into a world she didn't understand, but a woman coming into her own power. She caught sight of her mother across the room, deep in conversation with Francesca. That had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of her new life, explaining to her mother the truth about their family history and Lucy's place in Alexander's world. To Lucy's surprise, her mother had admitted to suspecting parts of the story for years, but had honored her own mother's wish to keep Lucy sheltered from their past. "Your grandmother would be proud," a familiar voice commented beside her. Don Ricci, the elderly Italian who had recognized her name at the translation dinner months ago, approached with a glass of champagne. She had the same steel in her spine. Lucy accepted the compliment with a gracious nod. "Thank you for coming, Don Ricci. Your presence honors us." The old man smiled approvingly at her perfect Italian and formal address. "The return of the Rossi name to our circles fills an absence many of us have felt for decades. Your great-grandfather was a man of principle in an era when such men were rare." Before Lucy could respond, Alexander appeared at her side, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture both protective and possessive. "Don Ricci," he acknowledged, "I see you've been reminiscing with my fiancé about the old days." The elderly Don inclined his head, simply expressing my pleasure at seeing old wrongs finally righted. The alliance between Moretti and Rossi was always one of the strongest foundations of our world. As the conversation continued, Lucy observed the subtle dance of respect and power that characterized these interactions. 6 months ago, it would have seemed like a foreign language. Now she read the unspoken messages as clearly as if they were subtitled. The evening progressed smoothly, culminating in Alexander calling for attention to make their official announcement. With Lucy at his side, he formally declared their engagement and her recognition as the legitimate heir to the Rossi legacy. In honor of this union, he concluded, the territories once held by the Rossi family will be restored under joint Moretti-Rossi administration, with profits directed to a foundation established in Antonio Rossi's name. This announcement caused a stir, not just the engagement, which had been widely speculated upon, but the territorial redistribution, which represented a significant shift in the balance of power. By framing it as a restoration of historical justice rather than a power grab, Alexander had made it difficult for anyone to object without appearing to condone the treachery that had destroyed the Rossis. As glasses were raised in toast, Lucy caught Alexander watching her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. For all the political maneuvering and strategic advantages their union represented, what existed between them had grown into something neither had expected, something genuine and powerful that transcended the practical considerations of their world. Later, when the last guest had departed and they were finally alone, Alexander led Lucy to the terrace where a bottle of champagne waited in ice. "To surviving your first official function as the future Mrs. Moretti," he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. Lucy smiled. Was I that obvious? Only to me, he assured her, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. You were magnificent. Even the old guard was impressed. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the city, their city in many ways. When I first met you, Alexander said quietly, I asked what you saw when you looked at me. The monster everyone fears, or the man no one knows. Lucy turned to him, setting down her glass to frame his face with her hands. I see you, she said simply. All of you. The leader who makes difficult decisions, the protector who honors ancient oaths, the man who loves with the same intensity he brings to everything else. Alexander turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. Not everyone could accept both sides. Not everyone had the advantage of understanding what it means to have a dual heritage, Lucy replied. The Waitress and the Rossi heir. We both live in two worlds, and now we've created our own. Alexander observed, drawing her closer. Something new from something old. Lucy leaned into him, savoring the sense of rightness she felt in his arms. Their path had been unexpected, dangerous at times, but had led them to a place neither could have anticipated that night at Salvatore, when a simple translation had changed everything. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what would have happened if I hadn't been working that night? If you hadn't offered that translation challenge? Alexander considered this for a moment. I believe we would have found each other eventually, he said with certainty. Some connections are inevitable. A blood oath transcending generations, Lucy teased. Something even older and more powerful, Alexander replied, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he reserved only for her. Something that makes even men like me believe in fate. As snow continued to fall gently around them, Lucy stood on tiptoe to kiss the man who had drawn her into his dangerous world and found himself transformed by her presence in it. The monster and the man, the waitress and the heir, all parts of who they were, now intertwined in a future neither could have imagined. In the distance, the lights of the city twinkled like stars brought down to earth, a kingdom they would navigate together, not as Moretti and Rossi, not as crime lord and translator, but simply as Alexander and Lucy, who had discovered that the most unexpected translations are sometimes the most perfect.